The fire had swallowed the house whole. Thick plumes of black smoke clawed at the stars as orange. Flames danced violently against the winter sky. The acrid scent of burning wood and melted plastic blanketed the street, searing nostrils and drawing tears. Sirens shrieked in the distance, growing louder, but help still felt far away. Neighbors stood in clusters, some holding their children, others just clutching their coats tighter as the icy wind whipped around them. There was nothing to be done, only to watch as the blaze turned memories, walls, and years of a life into ash. Children cried. Someone shouted for the fire department to hurry, but all eyes were drawn to the roaring hell across the street, where windows exploded outward and flames curled like greedy fingers through every cracked dot and through it all. Grace stood still. The wind cut across her cheeks like glass, but Grace didn't flinch. Her breath billowed in short, trembling clouds as her eyes stayed fixed on the fire, wide and unblinking. The heat of it reached her, even from across the road, and beneath the surface of that heat, something old and buried began to tremble. The crackle of fire wasn't just in her ears, which is in her bones, her memory. Her knees threatened to buckle, not from fear of the flames, but from the sudden onslaught of emotion, clawing its way to the surface. Screams, smoke, the scent of charred fabric. She was no longer standing on Wilson Avenue. She was somewhere else. 1 year ago, the same red glow, the same helpless crowd, the same rising panic. That night replayed in her mind like a cursed reel. The sirens that came too late, the sound of her husband coughing, trying to get to her from the other side of the flames, and then silence. No goodbye, no final words, just the sound of a collapsing roof. Now, here she was, again watching someone else's life unravel, watching the past crawl back into the present with fire-lit claws, and Grace couldn't move. A sudden blur shot past the stunned crowd. Gasps erupted as a large German shepherd sprinted out of nowhere, muscles coiled with urgency, eyes locked on the inferno. Without hesitation, the dog leaped over a sawhorse barricade and tore across the icy lawn. Paws slipping slightly on the snow-slick ground. Hey, hey! Someone shouted, but the dog didn't pause. It was madness. A suicide run. The shepherd vanished into the smoke before anyone could react. One moment it was there, and the next, the fire had swallowed it too. Whose dog is that? Did you see that? It just went inside. The murmurs swelled into panic, but still no one moved. Fear held everyone in place, frozen by the sheer impossibility of what they'd witnessed. People shouted conflicting suggestions. Others just stood, dazed and speechless. Except Grace. Something inside her broke free. Her boots crunched over the salted sidewalk as she moved forward, drawn by a strange urgency. Her heart pounded so violently it echoed in her ears, drowning out the noise around her. She didn't know what she was doing, only that she had to do it. The dog's bravery had shaken her awake. Grace had never seen that dog before in her life. It didn't belong to the neighborhood. No tags, no leash, no sign of an owner, but something about it. Something in its eyes when it charged forward. It struck her in a place she thought had gone numb. For the first time in a year, her heart didn't just hurt, it ached to feel again. A dog had done what no human dared. And in that wild, reckless courage, Grace saw something that cracked her open. Hope, not a loud or dazzling kind, but a flicker, fragile and flickering like a match in the dark. She took another step toward the fire, and toward whatever fate awaited her on the other side of that decision. The fire was a monster growling, spitting embers, devouring everything in its path. People screamed as firefighters shouted orders, the night flashing with red and orange light. Then, from the scorched entrance of the collapsing apartment, something moved. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. Emerging through the thick smoke came a dog, his fur blackened, one leg dragging uselessly behind him. Blood streaked his side and in his jaws. A child, a toddler, limp, soot-stained, cradled as delicately as a newborn chick. No one breathed. The flames crackled behind them, but all eyes were on this battered creature limping across the pavement, as if the only thing keeping him upright was the child's heartbeat. The dog staggered toward the flashing lights and collapsed gently, laying the child down with trembling care. For one terrible moment, the toddler didn't move. Then a cough, a desperate inhale. He's breathing. Someone shouted. EMTs surged forward, scooping up the boy and working fast. The dog didn't move. His chest barely rose, his eyes half-lidded, glazed with exhaustion and pain. The boy had survived the inferno. Because of him, the crowd broke into whispers, some into tears. Not a bark, not a whimper, just silence. Like the dog had given his last breath for the child's first. Grace stood frozen near the fire truck, the weight of her trauma pinning her in place. Years of smoke and sirens had carved out memories she'd buried deep, but this scene sliced through it all. She wasn't supposed to be here. She had left emergency work behind, but when the dog collapsed, something inside her cracked. A rush of instinct and heart collided. She dropped her coffee, pushed past the onlookers, and ran. Not away this time. Toward him. Grace dropped to her knees beside him, hands already moving. She checked for burns, bleeding, and heartbeat. "Stay with me," she whispered. Not sure who she was talking to, him or herself. His breath was ragged, but there, faint. She tore strips from her shirt, pressing them gently to the worst wounds, beneath the dirt and blood. His body trembled but didn't fight her touch. "You're not done," she murmured, her voice shaking. "You didn't come this far to leave, now." And somehow she could feel. He heard her, later, after the child was stable and the fire contained. The questions started. No collar, an EMT said. No microchip, nothing. Grace frowned, gently brushing soot from his singed fur. He came from inside. Far as we can tell, yeah. Nobody saw him before that. A mystery wrapped in scars, an ash dot. The media started calling him a miracle. Others, a ghost. But Grace, she looked into his eyes and saw something else, something familiar, something lost. Whatever his story was, it didn't end tonight. The animal control officer wanted to take him to a shelter. "He's badly injured," the man said. "We'll get him help." "No," Grace said sharply. "He's coming with me." She didn't know why the words came so fast, so certain. Maybe it was gratitude. Maybe it was instinct. Or maybe, deep down, she knew she owed him more than thanks. It wasn't just about what he did, it was what he carried. The weight in his eyes mirrored hers, too closely to ignore. Taking him home wasn't charity. It was recognition. Grace laid him on a thick blanket in her living room, the glow of a soft lamp replacing the flicker of fire. She cleaned his wounds slowly, whispering words she hadn't spoken aloud in years. Comfort, reassurance, hope. He flinched once, then stilled, as if listening. "You need a name," she said. Quietly, her voice cracked. "After what you did, you're a hero." She smiled faintly, tears rising in her eyes. "Yeah, that fits." Hero didn't bark. He didn't whine. He just watched her and, moving, unreadable. But his eyes, they told stories of fire and loss, of loneliness. Grace sat beside him, her fingers gently stroking the unburned part of his fur. In those eyes, she saw something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Connection. She had lost people. So had he, both survivors. Both were scared, and in that quiet moment, the silence between them felt less like emptiness and more like understanding. The night passed slowly. Hero dozed in and out of sleep. Grace stayed beside him, watching, listening to the rise and fall of his breath, like it anchored her to the present. She didn't know what tomorrow held, but tonight they had each other. Two broken souls, wrapped in the same blanket of quiet resilience. For the first time in years, Grace didn't feel alone. Neither did he. Hero stood by the doorframe, his body angled just slightly away, as if caught between staying and fleeing. Grace sat cross-legged on the floor, holding out her hand palm up, open, patient. His eyes met hers, not with fear, but with caution, like someone who had once trusted and paid dearly for it. She didn't move closer. She just whispered, "It's okay. You don't have to come today." And that was the rhythm they settled into. Grace spoke. Hero listened. He followed her around the house, alert but never quite relaxed, his movements deliberate, his body tense. He obeyed her cues, never aggressive, always polite, but there was a sliver of hesitation in every step, a pause in every breath, as if he feared the kindness was temporary. She noticed the scars under his fur, but she didn't ask, not yet. Nights were the hardest. The silence of the house stretched long and thin like old grief, and memories crept through the cracks. Grace began talking just to hear her own voice at first, muttering about bills or tomorrow's groceries. But slowly, the words turned softer, more fragile. "I miss her," she whispered one night, eyes fixed on the ceiling. "My sister used to sing to me when the world felt like too much." Hero lay curled at the foot of her bed, ears flicking gently with each word. He didn't move closer, but his breathing slowed, synced with hers, as if listening mattered more than proximity. "Never told anyone that," she added into the dark, her voice cracking just slightly. "Feels weird, saying it to a dog." But it didn't feel weird. Not really. It felt safe. The scream came out of nowhere raw sharp, and shaking the walls of her bedroom. Grace bolted upright, drenched in sweat, gasping for air, the scent of smoke still fresh in her subconscious. Her hands trembled as she clutched the sheets, her chest tight with panic. Then dash pressure, a warm weight pressed against her chest. She looked down and saw Hero, eyes wide but calm, one paw gently anchoring her. He didn't bark, didn't move, just stayed, steady as stone. She exhaled shakily, her fingers reaching for his thick fur. "You okay?" she whispered, but the question was more for herself. Hero's presence didn't erase the nightmare, but it dulled the edge. He was the anchor pulling her back to now. It started with 5-minute walks, just around the block. Grace kept the leash loose, the pace slow. Hero matched her stride like he'd done it 1,000 times, glancing up every so often to check on her. The silence between them felt different, outdoors less, like grief, and more like breathing space. She found herself talking again. "Not much. Just, look at that squirrel. Or you always stop at this bush, huh?" But he listened, always and slowly. Her steps grew lighter. She stopped flinching at every loud sound. Hero, in turn, began anticipating her movements, slowing when she slowed, speeding up when she picked up pace. They were sinking, healing. Together, the neighborhood hadn't seen Grace in months. But now, there she was, hair tied back, eyes still heavy, but walking. And beside her, the massive German shepherd no one recognized. Is that the rescue dog? Someone murmured from a porch swing. They say he was in bad shape, but look at him now. Grace noticed the stares. She felt them like wind on her skin, but she didn't respond. She kept her head down, letting Hero be the brave one. He held his tail high. His walk was proud, and slowly people started waving again. Hero's reputation spread faster than Grace's smile. Stories of how she found him during the storm made their way down sidewalks and through mailboxes. Kids pointed at him from bikes. A woman left a bag of treats on their doorstep with a note, for the brave one, but Grace. She stayed in the background. She skipped block parties. She didn't correct the rumors. Hero could have the spotlight. She just needed his shadow to feel safe. She wasn't ready to be seen, not yet. They were crossing the park when a little boy darted toward them, shouting, "Doggy." Hero froze. Then, like a switch had been flipped, he dropped to the ground. Eyes wide, ears back, muscles trembling. Grace barely had time to kneel beside him. "It's okay," she whispered, hand stroking his side. "You're safe. He's not going to hurt you." The boy's mother pulled him back with an apology. Grace nodded, distracted watching Hero's panic slowly fade. It was the first time she saw real fear in him, not caution, no hesitation, fear, whatever had happened to him before. It was darker than she'd guessed. That night, Grace stayed. Up late researching, dog behavior forums, trauma signs, rescue reports. A neighbor's offhand comment echoed in her ears. "He looks like one of those dogs from those fighting rings they busted last year." The scars, the flinching, the way Hero reacted to sudden movement. It all added up. Underground training, abuse, maybe even worse. Grace closed her laptop slowly, staring into the darkness where Hero lay curled on the rug. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "You didn't deserve any of that." The next morning, as dawn painted soft gold across the floor, Grace sat beside Hero and placed her hand on his paw. "I don't know how to fix you," she murmured. "I don't even know how to fix myself." Hero blinked, then rested his head on her lap. No grand gesture, no tail wag, just presence. That was the first time Grace allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they weren't as alone as they thought. The storm came out of nowhere. One clap of thunder, and Hero was gone from the couch, his body wedged tightly beneath the dining table. Eyes wide, chest heaving. Grace knelt beside him, her own breath steady. "It's okay," she whispered, brushing her fingers along his ears. "I've got you." She stayed there with him through every rumble, her calm presence wrapping around him like a blanket. And for the first time, their roles reversed. Grace was the anchor now. Something shifted after that night. Grace felt it. She didn't just comfort Hero, she found strength in doing it. When the wind howled again days later, she didn't flinch. She moved toward him. She became the steady voice, the grounding touch. Her healing wasn't just inward. Anymore it reached out, wrapped around him, and said, "You're not alone, either." They were jogging late, something she never used to do. Grace liked the quiet hum of the streetlights and Hero's rhythmic pace beside her. That's when they saw Eat, a small grey cat, limping, bleeding from its side near a trash can. Grace moved to help, but Hero stepped in front of her, blocking her path gently with his body. Then slowly he approached the cat, sniffing, watching. He nudged it forward, toward Grace. She scooped the cat up with shaking hands. You knew she was hurt, Grace said softly, watching Hero watch the cat. You knew. Hero didn't respond, but his tail gave a soft, single wag. Later, as the cat rested in a towel in their kitchen, Grace looked at Hero. Really looked. He wasn't just reacting anymore. He was choosing. Choosing to be near her. Choosing to protect. There was a fire in his eyes, now a sense of purpose that hadn't been there before. You're not just surviving anymore, she whispered. You're protecting something, someone. Hero rested his head on her foot, and she didn't move for a long time. It happened when she wasn't expecting it. She was putting food down for the cat, who'd now earned a name, Pebbles, and Hero came up beside her, nudging her elbow with a perfectly timed bump that made the bowl wobble and spill. Grace let out a laugh, short, sharp, and surprised. Then she smiled. A real one, small, crooked, but alive. Did you do that on purpose? She asked, turning to Hero. He blinked slowly, tail wagging. Mornings turned softer. Nights weren't so long. Grace made tea. Hero napped on the couch. Pebbles took the WINDOWSILL. That there were still nightmares, still moments of flinching. But the story was changing, not erased, but rewritten. They didn't heal by forgetting. They healed by being there, step by step, breath by breath. Two wounded souls, one home. And a bond that was no longer just about survival, but about building something new together. The moment the news anchor uttered the name, Grace dropped the coffee mug from her hand. Jake Redding. The words echoed through her living room like a gunshot. Her chest tightened. She hadn't heard that name in years, not since the trial. Not since he'd been locked away for animal cruelty and aggravated assault. The man who'd once tormented creatures with no voice. But now he had escaped. The reporter's voice continued, warning locals to remain vigilant. Grace couldn't move. Her eyes shifted to Hero, her loyal German shepherd, who sat alert by her side, ears twitching. It was as if he'd understood too, and somewhere in the back of her mind, fear whispered, he remembers you too. Hero changed. Overnight, he paced the hallway at odd hours, head low, ears back. He would sit stiffly in front of the back door and growl, not a playful grumble, but a deep, guttural warning. At first, Grace brushed it off as anxiety. Dogs could sense tension, right? But then came the night he stood in the darkened hallway, hackles raised, eyes locked on something invisible in the shadows. Grace followed his stare, but saw nothing. Still, a cold sweat coated her skin. It felt like the walls were closing in. The wind rattled the window panes. But this chill ran deeper, like a presence, just beyond sight. She reached down to touch Hero's head. He didn't flinch, but he didn't look away from the shadows either. Something was coming. It was after a late shift at the diner. Grace turned the corner onto her street and froze. Her porch light flickered, casting sharp flashes of light, and her front door, the one she always locked, stood cracked open. She parked with trembling hands and rushed up the steps. Hero, she called, heart in her throat, silence. She entered. Slowly, keys gripped between her fingers like makeshift claws. Nothing looked disturbed. The living room intact. The kitchen untouched. But Hero was nowhere to be seen, and the door Grace knew she'd locked it. She never forgot. Not since him. Suddenly, the house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like prey. Hero was gone, no broken glass, No overturned furniture. Just gone. Grace called his name again and again, voice cracking with desperation. She ran outside, barefoot, her breath forming white clouds in the cold night air. A neighbor across the street stepped onto his porch. "You okay, Grace? Have you seen Hero?" she begged. The man hesitated. "Actually, I saw a black van parked near your house earlier. Thought it was odd. No one got out." Her knees nearly gave out. A black van. Jake Redding's vehicle. In the old case had been black. She staggered back to her porch, fingers numb, chest hollow. Hero hadn't run away. He had been taken, and she had no idea where. The next morning, Grace walked. She couldn't drive. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Her legs moved like lead as she made her way to the station. Every step dragging her deeper into guilt. Hero had saved her once from fear, from loneliness, from herself, and now she'd failed to protect him. When she reached the counter, she tried to speak, but no words came. The officer noticed her tear-stained face. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Her voice finally broke free, barely a whisper. "My dog. He's missing, and I think he was taken." The nights became unbearable. Grace sat curled on the couch, staring at the empty corner where Hero used to sleep. His leash still hung by the door. His favorite Toyan old squeaky duck lay untouched on the floor. She couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. The silence screamed at her. She'd replay the night in her head, wondering what she missed. What sign had she ignored? Sometimes she'd think she heard scratching at the door, but it was just wind. Still, she stayed up, just in case, waiting, hoping, dreading the worst. On the third day, the call came, anonymous, untraceable. A gruff male voice, distorted. "Check the abandoned warehouse, Route 17 now." The line went dead. Grace rushed to the police with the message, heart pounding. It was a long shot, but they had nothing else. Officers surrounded the warehouse by dusk, flashlights cutting through dust and silence. Inside, what they found made one detective step back in. Horror, cages, dozens of them. The stench of neglect thick in the air, and then one bark, weak but familiar. Grace wasn't there, but she knew it in her bones. Hero was alive. Hero was found in the farthest cage, bruised, limping, but alive. His eyes were alert, watchful. He didn't bark when the officers opened the cage. He stood and limped to them, as if he'd been waiting. Around him were other dogs injured, trembling, some barely conscious. Jake Redding had returned to his old horrors, but Hero had survived worse before. He was the one who'd escaped Jake years ago, the one who testified through his scars. Now he'd returned, not just as a survivor, but as a protector. One officer knelt beside him. "You hung on, boy. You waited." Hero leaned forward, resting his battered head against the officer's chest. Just as officers prepared to clear the rest of the building, a creak echoed through the warehouse. Jake was still inside. He bolted from a back room with a stun baton, screaming. Chaos erupted. The officers yelled for backup, but before Jake could reach the nearest cage, Hero launched forward, bruised limbs and all. He charged. He intercepted Jake mid-step, teeth bared, growling with a fury only the betrayed could summon. Jake stumbled, trying to swing, but Hero snapped at his wrist. Drawing blood, it was enough. Officers tackled Jake to the ground, cuffing him as Hero finally collapsed. He didn't fight. He didn't flee. He'd done what he came to do. He'd saved them all. Later, an officer would tell Grace the part that made her cry the hardest. He didn't try to escape. He said gently, We opened the cages. The other dogs ran. But Hero, he stayed, sat right in front of the cage door like a soldier. He wouldn't leave until every last dog was out. Grace bit her lip, emotion choking her. That's who he is, she whispered. Always protecting, always the hero. The officer nodded. Yeah, he waited for us. At the shelter, Grace's eyes searched every room until she found him. Hero lay on a padded table, wrapped in bandages, 4 in his leg. A vet stood nearby, giving instructions. But Grace only saw him. The moment Hero heard her voice, his ears twitched. Then, slowly, his tail wagged. "Hey, baby," she whispered, tears falling freely as she knelt beside him. "I'm here. I'm so sorry." Hero nudged his nose into her hand, bloodied, broken, but not beaten. They had found each other again. She stayed with him through the night. At one point, he whimpered, shifting in his sleep. She held him tighter. "You came back to me," she whispered into his fur. "Even when I didn't know how to find you. You found your way back." Hero opened his eyes for a moment, just enough to meet hers. "You were never just my dog," she said softly. "You were always the hero." The gymnasium echoed with laughter and tiny claps as elementary school children filled the bleachers, waving handmade signs that read, "Thank you, hero," and "Real heroes have paws." The principal's voice crackled through the microphone. But no one listened. They were all watching Hero. Tail wagging, tongue out, eyes bright. Hero didn't understand the fuss. But Grace did. When the mayor offered a grand city ceremony, a television segment, even a medal, Grace had politely declined. "He doesn't need a stage," she said gently. "He needs kindness, familiar faces, joy." So instead, she asked, for something smaller, something real, a local celebration where laughter came from children and the applause was pure. As Hero sat at Grace's feet, a little girl stepped forward, placed a crayon-drawn ribbon round his neck, and whispered, "Thank you for being brave." Hero leaned into Grace's side, unaware that the whole room had fallen silent, moved by the stillness of the moment, because in that gym, among the small voices and bright eyes, Hero was exactly what the world needed, a reminder that quiet courage changes everything. Outside, reporters still waited, microphones angled, cameras ready, but Grace looked at them through the school's glass door and shook her head. "I know you want a story," she said softly, stepping out, "but this isn't about headlines. It's about healing." She glanced at Hero, who was now happily chewing a tennis ball given by a student. "This dog, he wasn't perfect when I found him. Scared, angry, hurting, just like me." One journalist lowered her camera. Grace continued, voice strong but tender. "This isn't a fairy tale, it's a second chance. And second chances don't need spotlights. They just need someone to believe." She smiled, gave one final wave, and walked away. Hero followed without hesitation. The shelter smelled of disinfectant and heartbreak. Grace had walked in with steady steps, Hero by her side. The staff greeted them with cautious curiosity. Many had seen his picture in local news, but Hero wasn't here to bask in fame. He was here to help others heal. As Grace leaned down to meet the eyes of a trembling pit bull in the back kennel, Hero approached first to his back, body relaxed, tail gently swaying. The pit bull flinched, then leaned forward. Grace smiled, tears touching her lashes. "See, he remembers," she whispered, "what it's like to be afraid, but more importantly, what it's like to be loved." That day, Grace signed up as a volunteer. And every week after, Hero came along not to be a hero again, but to help others become whole. The wind was different, now no longer biting, no longer laced with pain. It danced through the backyard, tousling Hero's fur as he raced across the grass, chasing falling leaves like a puppy discovering the world for the first time. His legs, once stiff with trauma, now carried him with ease. No fences closed him in. No chains, no cages, only space. Only light. Grace stood at the porch, coffee in hand, watching as Hero barked joyfully at a butterfly that refused to be caught. Sometimes he'd pause mid-run, trot over to her and nudge her hand with his nose. She'd laugh softly, bend down and whisper, "Go on, you've earned this." And off he'd go again, wild and free, heart unchained. Each joyful gallop reminded Grace of a truth she now held sacred. Healing wasn't about forgetting the past, it was about running into the future. Unafraid, in the quiet corner of her backyard, Grace knelt on damp soil, hands dirty, heart full. She planted daisies for joy, lavender for peace, sunflowers for strength, and in the center, she placed a wooden sign, Hero's Garden. Each bloom had a name. Dogs they'd helped at the shelter. Some adopted, some are still healing, some gone, but not forgotten. Hero lay beside her, nose twitching with curiosity as she patted down the earth. "This garden," Grace whispered, "is for the ones who were broken, like you, like me." Hero licked her hand and rested his head on her lap. The garden wasn't grand, but it was sacred, because every petal that swayed in the wind spoke the same silent promise. Love always returns, sometimes in pause, sometimes in petals, always in time. The house was silent, except for the soft flicker of candlelight. Grace sat in her living room, a framed photo of her late husband beside her. She didn't cry, not tonight. Tonight, she remembered. The laughter, the plans, the grief that nearly drowned her. And then the night Hero showed up. He had been broken, angry. She had been numb, lost. Somehow, their shattered pieces had fit together. Hero padded over, curling up at her feet. His eyes found hers. Without a word, he climbed onto the couch, gently resting his head on her lap. She stroked his fur in silence, the candle's flame reflecting in her eyes. In that quiet moment, Grace understood. Healing doesn't erase pain. It honors it, with love. The morning sun crept through the curtains. Golden and soft. Grace sat on the porch steps, Hero at her side, both staring out at the blooming garden and listening to the birds argue over the birdbath. She broke the silence. "You know," she whispered, "everyone says you saved that family from the fire, that you're a hero." Hero tilted his head, as if trying to understand. "But what they don't know," she continued, voice trembling, "is that you saved me, too." The words hung in the air, raw and real. "When he died," she said, eyes brimming, "I didn't want to wake up. I didn't want to feel. I just existed." She placed her hand on Hero's chest. His heartbeat was steady. "But you brought me back, one paw print at a time." Hero leaned into her hand. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but they weren't sad tears. They were tears of gratitude, of closure. "I thought I rescued you," she whispered, "but all along, it was you." The wind stirred the leaves, and in that sacred moment, everything was finally whole. The embers of the fire had long cooled, and the charred remains of Grace's studio now stood silent ghosts of her past clinging to the blackened walls. But what survived was not just the dog who had clawed through the smoke and flames. It was something much more fragile. Grace's will to go on. She hadn't painted in months, not since the funeral. Her brushes, once dancing with color, had sat stiff in dried paint and dust. But then came Hero, scorched, scarred, and trembling, yet alive. In his eyes, Grace saw a reflection of herself burnt by life, but not broken. Each day, as Hero rested beside her easel, head on paws, gaze steady and warm, Grace found herself lifting a brush again, first tentative strokes, the bold ones, and, for the first time in months, color returned to her world, not on the walls, but within her. Hero hadn't come with a wagging tail or playful bark. He was quiet, cautious, haunted. Much like Grace, he never needed to know her story. He only sensed it. The sleepless nights, the silent dinners, the way she stood too long staring out the window. Hero didn't try to fix her. He simply stayed. And in that unwavering stillness, he offered something no one else had permission to grieve and space. To heal in return, Grace never asked where he came from or what had scarred his side. Some wounds don't need retelling. They need understanding. And somehow, they understood each other perfectly. The night Grace carried Hero from the wreckage, she had told herself it was the right thing to do, that saving the stray gave her purpose again, something outside herself to protect. But weeks later, as she woke from another dream of fire and loss wetting, panicked Hero was already there, not barking, not pacing, just resting his chin gently on her knee, anchoring her to the moment, to now. It was in that quiet comfort that Grace finally understood. She hadn't rescued Hero. He had walked into her life to pull her back from the edge she didn't even know she was standing on. Grace had once believed love came with vows and promises, ceremonies and rings, but all of that had turned to ashdot. What she found instead was a creature with tired eyes and matted fur, who never asked for anything but gave everything. Hero didn't try to fix her. He didn't need her to smile or pretend. He only needed to be near her, to stay. And he did. Through every quiet evening, through every hesitant laugh, through every broken moment, slowly mending, he stayed. And that, she realized, was love. Not in words or grand gestures, but in constancy. In the weeks after the fire, people came and went. Flowers wilted, cards gathered dust. Words, no matter how kind, felt hollow. But Hero, he remained. He didn't offer clichés or empty comforts. Instead, he laid beside her on the cold wooden floor when she couldn't find the strength to get up. He nudged her gently toward the porch on days when she forgot what sunshine felt like. His silence wasn't empty, it was full of meaning. It was a presence. It was loyalty. And in that steadfast companionship, Grace discovered the one thing she thought she had lost forever: hope.